All right, let's talk about something every software engineer thinks about, your career. How do you actually move up that ladder? It's not just about putting in the years. It's about a pretty big shift in how you think. So let's pull back the curtain and really demystify what it takes to grow.
I mean, this is the million-dollar question, right? Is it knowing more languages? Is it being able to code at lightning speed? Or just having more years on your resume? Well, those things might play a tiny part, but the real difference, it's something way more interesting.
So, to get to the heart of it, let's take a quick detour, completely away from code. Let's talk about airplanes. An architect named Mark Richards asks this great question. Is it better for an airplane to have its engines on the wings or on the tail? Now think about it. Wing-mounted engines are way easier to get to for maintenance, and you can fit bigger, more powerful ones on there. But tail-mounted engines mean it's much quieter for the passengers, and they don't suck up as much junk from the runway. So, which one is actually better?
And that right there is the entire point. There isn't one single right answer. The best design? Well, it depends on what you're trying to achieve. And this shift in thinking, from hunting for the one correct answer to analyzing trade-offs, that's the very first key to unlocking how a senior developer thinks.
Okay, so before we can build up the right way of thinking, we've got to knock down some of the common myths that hold a lot of us back.
First up is the myth of the all-knowing guru. The expectation that a senior dev is basically a walking encyclopedia who has every single answer. But Vadim Krafrichenko points out that the reality is completely different. Your real expertise is shown by how well you can navigate uncertainty. It's not about having the answers, it's about being really good at asking the right questions to find them. Here's another one. The dream that being a senior means you only get to work on brand new, shiny, cutting-edge projects. The truth is, for most senior engineers, a massive part of their value is their ability to dive into existing, sometimes messy, legacy code bases and actually make them better. That's where some of the gnarliest, most interesting problems live.
When you're more junior, you see a million things you want to fix. And you want to fix them all right now. But a senior developer gets that big changes aren't just about code. You need a budget. You need to get your managers on board. You need to convince stakeholders. It becomes less about just changing the code and more about navigating the whole organization.
So if being senior isn't about being a know-it-all or chasing new tech, what is it about? Well, it's about developing an architect's mindset. And believe it or not, that entire mindset can be boiled down to just two simple but incredibly powerful words.
It depends. Seriously. Pretty much every good answer you'll give as a senior engineer starts right here. Now, this isn't a cop-out, it's not a non-answer. It's actually the start of a much deeper, much more valuable conversation.
Because obviously you can't just stop there, right? Saying it depends immediately begs the most important follow-up question you can ask. What exactly does it depend on? This is where the real work, the real analysis truly begins.
Let's make this concrete. Imagine you're building a messaging system. Should you use a publish-subscribe model or a point-to-point model? Well, it depends. PubSub is amazing for extensibility. You can add new services later without changing anything. But a point-to-point system gives you way tighter data security. So which one matters more for this project? Is it flexibility or security? Having that conversation, that is architectural thinking. Okay, so thinking in trade-offs is a huge step. But how do you actually measure your growth in a more structured way? How do you turn these concepts into a real plan? Let's look at a really practical framework that helps with just that.
The engineering progression framework from the company Monzo is just fantastic. It breaks down what seniority means into 4 key areas. And notice, it's not just about your technical skills. It's also about your impact on the business, the scope of the problems you're trusted to solve, and the professional behaviors you show up with every day, like communication and leadership.
And I love this quote from their framework. It's the perfect way to think about this. It's a compass that points you in the right direction, not a GPS that gives you turn-by-turn instructions. Your career growth isn't about just ticking off a bunch of boxes. It's about pointing yourself towards bigger scope and greater impact.
And there's real research that backs this up. It shows that expertise isn't a simple checklist. It's this dynamic system. Your personal skills and your motivation affect the kind of work you do. How you behave while doing that work, plus getting feedback and deliberately practicing, creates new knowledge and makes you better. It's a feedback loop, this constantly evolving system where things like self-reflection are absolutely critical.
And what's really cool is that this way of thinking about expanding your scope and impact doesn't just stop once you hit senior. It's the exact same principle that guides you to those even more senior roles, like staff and principal engineer. This analogy just makes the difference so incredibly clear. A senior engineer is an expert at execution. They figure out the absolute best technical route to get from A to B. A staff engineer steps up to the level of strategy. They're the one deciding that B is actually the right destination for the business. And then the principal engineer? They're operating at the level of vision. They're the ones who identify the problem we need to solve in the first place, before we even start thinking about A and B.
Now I know, thinking about that leap from senior to principal can feel, well, pretty massive. But building the foundation you need for that kind of growth doesn't have to be some huge, overwhelming thing. It can start with one simple, consistent habit you do every single day.
Just 20 minutes. That's it. That's all it takes to start building the kind of broad technical knowledge that is non-negotiable for thinking like an architect.
Here's the rule from Mark Richards. The very first 20 minutes of your workday, before you open your email, before you look at your tickets, that time belongs to your career. Use it to read articles and explore topics that you've heard of but don't really get. Your goal isn't to become an expert overnight. The goal is to just move a topic from the I don't know what I don't know category to the I know that I don't know this category. That is how you build true technical breadth.
So as we wrap this up, the big takeaway is that career growth is an active process. It's something you do. It's about changing your mindset, understanding your impact, and being disciplined about broadening your knowledge. So the only question left for you is, what are you going to learn in your next 20 minutes?